Hey everybody, welcome back to Tori's Top 10. This video will be on Chapter 7, the topic of abortion. The number 9 thing you should know is, what is an abortion? An abortion is the ending of a pregnancy. The number 8 thing you should know about this chapter is, what is a therapeutic abortion? A therapeutic abortion is the intentional ending of a pregnancy in order to save the mother's life. Number 7, what is a spontaneous abortion? A spontaneous abortion is the ending of a pregnancy due to natural causes. This can also be understood as a miscarriage. The number 6 thing you should know is, what is an induced abortion? An induced abortion is the intentional ending of a pregnancy, as opposed to a spontaneous abortion, which is not intentional. The number 5 thing you should know about the chapter on abortion is, what is Roe v. Wade? Roe v. Wade is a monumental court case from 1973 in which Jane Roe, whose real name was Norma McCorvey, sought a non-therapeutic abortion in Texas, where at the time only therapeutic abortions were legal. So it was only legal to have an abortion if the abortion would save the mother's life. Otherwise, a woman could not choose to have an abortion. So this case centered on the question of whether or not the Constitution allows for the right of a woman to obtain an abortion, thereby overriding the Texas prohibition on non-therapeutic abortions. In the decision of the court held that a woman's right to an abortion does in fact fall within the right to privacy, and this is recognized by the Griswold v. Connecticut case, which is protected by the 14th Amendment. This decision gives a woman a right to abortion during the entirety of the pregnancy and defines the different levels of state interest for regulating an abortion in the second and third trimesters. So you should have a good idea of the legal result of this very important groundbreaking case. The upshot of this court case is that no state can make abortions performed before viability illegal. So you need to know what viability is. According to the 14th Amendment, a woman has a qualified right to personal privacy and protection from state interference. What this means is that in the first trimester, women's rights can't be interfered with. In the second trimester, after viability, the state can intervene unless a woman's life or health is at stake. So, a therapeutic abortion is legal. Non-therapeutic abortions are legal in the first trimester prior to viability. This is now a federal law with precedents set by Roe v. Wade. However, as the 14th Amendment has been interpreted, there is a qualified right to this personal privacy. And we'll see how this has been interpreted in some states. So note that the law, including the Constitution, has not defined a person as including unborn fetuses. This is going to become very important to any of the arguments that we see on the abortion debate. Not only that, the Christian Bible, which is just one of many religious texts, also does not define a person as including unborn fetuses. So we said that a woman's right to privacy is said to be a qualified right. This has led to some legal rulings as a consequence of the precedents set on the federal level by Roe v. Wade. Some of these consequential legal rulings include the following. A woman might be required to give written, informed consent to have an abortion. The government is not required to fund abortions. Parental consent can be demanded of minors. States can forbid the use of public facilities to perform abortions. so long as they're not therapeutic abortions. Women can be required to wait 24 hours after consenting to an abortion in order to receive that abortion. And states can require that women are given abortion information. Some of these consequential legal rulings that have been made law in more conservative states have been put in place and have made obtaining an abortion more difficult for women. So these legal constraints can be enforced prior to viability so long as they do not result in an undue burden on women seeking abortions. Of course, the interpretation of undue burden is what's at stake here. Is it an undue burden, for example, for a woman who is poor and lives in a rural area where there are not non-publicly funded abortion clinics, and she doesn't have transportation and she has to get to the clinic to give consent, yet still can't have the abortion procedure until 24 hours after consent, so she has to make her way back again a day or two later? Whether or not these are undue burdens are some of the issues that would be at stake in this part of the abortion debate. Number 4, what are the 3 most common positions on the abortion debate? The 3 most common positions on abortion are 1, that abortion is never morally acceptable unless it's needed to save a woman's life. So this is the more conservative position on this issue, that unless the abortion is therapeutic, it's never morally permissible. Another common position is that abortion is acceptable whenever the woman chooses it, since the unborn fetus is not a person, but the woman is. This is the more liberal position on abortion. And third, the more moderate position on abortion is that some abortions can be morally justified, but not all abortions can be morally justified. These are very general positions, and there are a number of complex views that people might have on abortion. However, whether you're more on the conservative side, more in the middle, or more on the liberal side of this debate, most people do agree on these things: that murder is wrong, that persons have a right to life, and that personal freedom should only be limited for good reason. So taking these 3 common beliefs and understanding what that means in terms of the issue of abortion is what's at stake for us and what's in front of us for this chapter. The number 3 thing that you should know is, what is the main conservative argument against abortion? The main conservative argument against abortion looks like this: killing the unborn is wrong because the killing of an innocent human being is wrong and the unborn is an innocent human being. However, one objection to this argument is that the argument commits what we call the fallacy of equivocation. We are equivocating, that is, using 2 different meanings when we use the term human being. When we use the term human being in premise 1, we mean a being with all of the capacities required for full moral status, whereas in premise 2, we mean human being as a member of the human species. These are 2 different things, so there's a fallacy of equivocation going on here. So this argument requires us to think a little bit more about premise 1 and whether or not the killing of an unborn fetus is the same as killing a person. We can't merely assume that. So the conservatives would respond to that objection by saying, okay, well, I guess I see what you're saying. Let me just change my argument. So the conservative argument becomes the killing of an innocent person is wrong, and the unborn is an innocent person from conception, therefore abortion is wrong. But the liberal response to this argument is, okay, the argument's now valid. There's not a fallacy of equivocation happening, but it's not a sound argument because premise 2 is not true. It's false that the unborn is an innocent person from conception. A single cell is not a person. A group of 4 cells or 8 cells is not a person. Yet conservatives would defend personhood by saying there is no point that can distinguish personhood from non-personhood, so personhood begins at conception. Yet the liberal response to this claim is that this is also fallacious. This is committing what we call the conceptual slippery slope fallacy. In the first weeks after conception, the embryo is merely a set of undifferentiated cells, which may become a person. In fact, it may become 2 people, or 3 people, or no people. But at conception, there is no person. So it's a conceptual slippery slope to say that because we cannot figure out precisely when a person becomes a person, that they always are a person. This is like saying that an acorn is an oak tree. Because we can't say exactly what day or how many days after being planted an acorn becomes an oak tree, that doesn't mean that an acorn is an oak tree. It's not. It's an acorn. It may or may not become an oak tree, but an acorn is not an oak tree. So conservatives might say, oh boy, you really got me now, but let me try this one. Well, we have to defend personhood and continue our stance that abortion is wrong because embryos are potential persons. They may not be persons now, but they're potential persons. So abortion is wrong. The liberal objection to this line of reasoning is that there's a difference between having a trait that gives you a moral right and a legal right, and having the potential to develop a trait that gives you that right. So, for example, as a 5-year-old, you have the potential to vote when you turn 18, but you don't have the right to vote as a 5-year-old. So the moral rights that we assign to persons are assigned to persons, not potential persons. There are some other problems with the potentiality argument. That is that if we consider single cells who are potential persons to be sacred, then all eggs and sperm would have to be treated as persons. Any cell that could be possibly cloned, like stem cell, has a potential for personhood and thus should be treated as a person. You might see where the problem lies here. If every sperm has to be saved because it's a potential person, there are some serious implications for what that means. Number 2, what is the main liberal argument for abortion? The main liberal argument is that the unborn is not a person. Having human DNA is not synonymous with personhood. There are properties that qualify one as a person, but our species, being a member of the human species, is not a sufficient property for personhood. Personhood requires things like rationality, self-consciousness, having interests and desires, agency, a conception of self. So people who are dead, for example, we don't consider them as having full moral personhood. Since a fetus has none of the properties required for personhood and thus does not deserve full moral rights, although they may be due moral consideration, just like animals, babies, children, the elderly, yet they are not full persons. The conservative objection to this argument is that standards for personhood are set too high. So victims of dementia or the severely impaired would not be persons on the liberal view. The liberal response to this is that although those people may or may not be full persons in the moral sense, that doesn't mean that we ought to kill them. That's not the argument. There may be other reasons why it would be morally wrong. It would be harmful to society, to their families. We care about them. So there are reasons that we don't kill babies or the elderly, but it doesn't change the fact that moral personhood requires things like consciousness, having interests and desires, the capacity to use reason and language. Perhaps the biggest challenge to the liberal view is that conservatives argue that The liberal view sanctions infanticide. If killing a fetus is permissible because of its lack of personhood, then killing an infant is permissible. But as we've said, the liberal argument that all those of the human species are not full moral persons does not lead to the conclusion that it's morally permissible to kill babies or the elderly or the unconscious. Infants do have some moral standing. It is wrong to kill infants, just as it is wrong to kill the elderly or dogs or dolphins without some other kind of moral justification. But the moral justification for not killing is not because dogs are people, any more than a group of 8 cells is a person in the moral sense. And finally, you should understand what the moderate view on abortion entails. Those who take the moderate view on abortion tend to make these kinds of claims. First, that a fetus achieves personhood somewhere between conception and birth, perhaps at viability. A fetus is not a person at conception, but at some point they do become a person. Another claim of the moderate is that the moral standing of right to life increases gradually as the fetus develops. So one's having a right to life is greater at 9 months than it is at 9 hours. And this kind of argument is typically based on a utilitarian argument from the idea of sentience, that one cell or a group of 8 cells doesn't yet have a nervous system. It doesn't have organs. It can't feel pain. But at 9 months, whether inside the womb or outside the womb, the fetus can feel pain. And for this reason, there's a right to life. And third, another moderate claim is that even if a fetus is a person, abortion still might be morally justified. A right to life does not guarantee a right to use someone else's body to stay alive. So the right to life is not absolute. Here we get the kind of conflicts that we're used to dealing with in these ethical issues. So we'll read about the infamous unconscious violinist case in one of the additional readings. All right, folks, that's it for now. Make sure you have a good handle on these basic terms and basic arguments, because we're going to dig in much, much deeper on some of the specific arguments that are given on the topic of abortion in the additional readings.